Okay, now that the difficult job of placing and sketching your objects in is done, now it's time for the fun to begin. We need to render this thing. Before we do, we need to indicate a few things in our composition. Most importantly, the complex shape of the light break. So we have side light, and we have a light break that is running like this on the Pear, which could stand to be a little bit wider, by the way. Okay, so it's running this way, like this, and then running down like this, then running across this way, and then I know, because we're dealing with a spherical object, the light break needs to run across the bottom like this. All right? So light break here is going to get kind of bleached out, particularly in this image, which is not great. But because I know it's there, I can put it in. Look where the cast shadow is. It starts here, runs this way. Don't use a sharp line to indicate the cast shadow, ever. We have a lot of diffusion here. It needs to get softer this way. That's on the Pear. Now when it comes to reflective objects, all rules of light logic fall away. We're going to do something else. We'll get to it in a second. But we can still indicate the shape of the cast shadow, which runs across like this, runs across this way, like this. Really interesting, beautiful cast shadow, by the way. I think. I find these things interesting. Maybe you don't. We have a cast shadow running this way. Here we have a darker, semi-reflective copper cup with a light break that runs like this. We have a little band, and then it runs across this way. I'm not entirely sure I got the shape of this thing right. I think it needs to taper in ever so slightly this way. Okay, it's cylindrical. We have a light break that runs like this, and then it's slightly rounded along the bottom. Just like the Pear, the light break is going to curve. So here we have a light break going this way. We have a cast shadow. Take the time to indicate the shapes of your cast shadows and the shapes of your light breaks where you can see them. Right? We can't see them everywhere, but where we can, we'll absolutely do it. Okay, here's another cast shadow going this way, like this. Okay, let's quickly deal with a Pear, because that's going to be our easiest object to render. We're already starting off with a dark value here. So when you shade, don't go too dark right away. Start from the midtone, go a little tiny bit darker. Use the side of your pencil. Make sure your charcoal pencils are sharpened properly. Shade them down just a little bit, like this. And then you can use your blending stump to smooth out the shading. Now, this might feel a little bit pale at first, and it probably is. However, the next step is to start erasing out the lights so you can compare your lights against the shadows. You'll find that as you erase out, the contrast will increase, making your shadows look darker. So here's the most important principle of working on a mid-tone paper. Shade a little bit, erase a little bit. Shade a little bit more, erase a little bit more. Constantly be bouncing back and forth between your shadows and lights so that you're able to compare the two. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but the shadows now appear darker because they're next to this lighter value. Value is very, very, very relative. I don't know how dark one thing is until I compare it to something else. If I just shade without erasing, chances are I'll be thrown off by this gray paper and end up making my shadows too dark. Alright, so the next step is to go back in the shadow and find my core shadows. Here's a core shadow. Here's a core shadow. We have a core shadow running across this way, running this way, like this. And then I can use my blending stump to soften the edges of my core shadow to make sure that it goes fuzzy. These things were a little bit difficult to do in our graphite pencil. Now that we're using stumps, now we're using a really blending material like charcoal, it becomes really easy. I'm also going to erase out my reflected light. Keep in mind, a reflected light cannot be as bright as the direct light, so when you're erasing out the reflected light, now that you have the direct light to compare it to, you're able to get it right. So let's go a little bit lighter here, this way, like that. Like this. And now we're going to start going a little bit lighter in the lights, like this. Let's go a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter. Say hi to everybody, Emil. Look at the camera and go hi.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Go play a little bit, okay? And go play a little bit, and I'll play with you in a second.
Hi.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Now,
I don't see
for
it.
sharp edges, you can use your hard eraser. Now, be careful. Don't go too bright. We need to reserve some brighter values for our highlights.
But
Okay. So let's erase out the highlights here, like this.
yeah.
Yeah, we're going to erase out some highlights here, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to erase some here, like this. Going this way. And also, don't forget to shade your cast shadow at the same time as you're shading your object. Right? So we're going to go a little bit darker here. See how I'm going darker, Emil? See it? Yeah. Going darker here.
Wow.
Yes.
Can I do it?
Yeah, you can do it later when you're big.
Can I do it now?
Okay. But you're going to make a mess, you know?
But I'm gonna be careful.
Yeah, but you can still make a giant mess. You have your pencils. You want to bring them here and draw a little bit? Yeah? I'll give you a piece of paper. No, but don't draw on mine. Okay, let's go a little bit darker in the shadow. When you guys are working on the cast shadow, think about what values are next to them and erase those out. So we have a cast shadow that is next to the value of the table. Can I borrow the stump, please? Emil, I need it. Give me my stump. I can't. No. I'll give you something else. Give it to me, please.
Oh no.
Okay, my son's misbehaving. He stole my blending stump. I have another one. Okay, so I'm going to erase out the fact that the cast shadows have a sharp edge here. Use your hard eraser to do that. Like this, and then I can see a little bit of light passing behind the pear, here, like this. This is where your little erasers become really handy to get those kinds of sharp edges. And then I can use my soft eraser to erase around the cast shadow where it goes a little bit softer. This way.
Glass.
Like this. Yeah.
Darker.
Now that you've got the cast shadow, we can go a little bit darker. I'm going to switch to my softer pencil here. This is going to be my extra soft. And put in those dark
Wow, look at this
darks.
white.
Yeah.
And too white.
Now usually the very darkest values I don't blend down. So here I might, but here I'm going to leave the black just as it is. Because if I keep blending it, it's going to end up looking a little bit gray. So I think the pear is more or less done. Maybe you could use a little bit more reflected light here. Like this. Maybe a little bit of a lighter value here. But you can see this charcoal reduction is considerably faster than the graphite. It's really easy to get soft transitions, whereas in graphite you have to be really patient. Now that we have access to our blending stumps, which my son just gave back to me, thank you, it becomes really, really easy. Okay, so now let's move on to something that's a little bit more complicated. We've got this very dark, reflective vase. Whenever you have a dark object, the very first step is to darken the whole thing. Okay, Emil, you need to go and play right now. Go, please. Okay. All right, I just lost my image. Okay. All right. Okay, just shift my camera. Okay, let's go darker. Let's go darker. Let's go darker. Let's go darker. Darker, let's go darker, let's go darker. Look, we already have a dark gray, a relatively dark gray. But it'll help for us to establish the general local value of the object first before we start erasing it out. Okay, that's going to be step one. Next step is to start putting in our dark reflections. So, look, no shortcuts here, no real tricks. Look at the reflections and start drawing them. So we have a dark reflection here. I can see, now that I'm looking, a reflection of the pear right here. That's pretty interesting and fun to draw. We have some dark reflections here, like this. I see the reflection of the cup here, possibly, like this. Going this way. Now I can use my blending stuff to soften it. Let me put in a few darker reflections here as well. This. Okay. It's going darker here, like this. Alright, so now that I've got some darks, now we can start erasing out some of the highlights. Start off with your kneaded eraser. So we have a really strong reflection here. A highlight. What else are we seeing? We have a few reflections here. Going this way, we have a reflection of the pear right about here. We see some other reflections there. Again, there's no shortcuts. The more details you put in, the more reflective your object starts looking. Do not forget, once again, that value is relative. So really, I need to also start erasing around the vase. So that little monkey head we were talking about, the cast shadow also. Really, really important in getting the appropriate balance between our lights and our darks. Start going a little bit darker still. And we can start going a little bit darker. Even though this is a dark object, I'm still bouncing back and forth between shadows and lights, between the object and the value around it. So it's really dark here. Okay. And again, save the extremes of light and dark to the very end. Right? So we've got a really nice glowing highlight. The reason why I was able to make it glow is because I darkened the value around it. If I just erased on the gray, it wouldn't show up. Okay, so I'm going to keep working on this a little bit more. More details to come in the next tutorial.